What's up guys, and welcome back to this week's lunchtime financial tip. I record these during my lunch hour so you can watch them during your lunch hour. This week we're going to cover how to fix a bad credit score ASAP during COVID. If you like this information and you'd like to see more videos like this, please comment down below as well as subscribe and smash the like button. So with that said, let's jump on the screens and let's get started.
How to fix a bad credit score ASAP for free during COVID-19. Now here's a disclaimer. If you're new to having credit, that's the number one reason why your credit score is low, and there's nothing really you can do about it. All you can do is maintain the credit that you do have up to date, as well as give it time. It will add up. I would recommend waiting about 7 to 8 months before you apply for another credit card, or if you're going to go get a car loan, always space them out. That's what's ideal. But until then, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until you build some credit history. So why do I want to have a higher credit score? Well, the number one reason is to save money when you borrow. Low credit score equals higher interest rates. So every time you buy a car, that loan is costing you more. Every time you buy a property, that property is costing you more in interest. And anytime you use your credit card and don't pay off the balance at the end of the month, it's costing you more to borrow that money. Another reason why you would like to have a higher credit score is because you get discounts on things such as your car insurance. People with higher credit scores get better discounts on their car insurance. Another reason why you would want to have good credit is to avoid rejections. When you apply to move into an apartment or apply to a condo board, or if you apply to certain jobs, they do require a certain credit score. So by having a higher score in the beginning, you avoid those rejections. So let's get started increasing our credit score. So the first thing we want to do is run a credit report. Now, luckily in the United States, the law requires and allows us to apply for a free credit report from each of the following credit reporting agencies. So I would first contact any one of these three and pull a credit report. So here's a tip. You're entitled to one report a year from each of the three. So space out about 4 months each request. That way you cover a full year and then are eligible for another credit report the following year. Step 2, once you get your credit report, look it over. What we're looking for are negative comments such as late payments, accounts and collections, credit inquiries, any maxed out credit cards, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. Let's look at late payments, delinquencies. These stay on your credit report for 7 years. They're reported, at least in the United States, after 30 days. In my general experience, it's been more like 60 days. The banks like giving you an extra 30 days to pay because they can charge you a late fee and interest. So they're not going to be that quick to report you to the credit bureau. But here's an interesting tidbit about late payments. Let's say you had a late payment 4 or 5 years ago. Well, guess what? The impact to your credit score, if you've not had a late payment since then, is lesser. But if you have a recent late payment, well, that's really bad because your payment history makes up 35% of your overall credit score. Now, what strategies are there for resolving the late payments? Well, the first thing is you have to pay it off, and pay it off as soon as possible. It's only getting worse and it's costing you more money in interest. But once you're paid in full, ask the lender as a courtesy to remove the late payment from your credit report. You might even try to negotiate with the lender and say, if we come up with a payment schedule and I comply with it, could you please change the status to current? They say no, sorry, that's the way it is. But if they do, I still want you to look at your credit report. And what you always want to do is look for inaccuracies, the errors. And once you find one, you dispute it. As that's fuel to help you get what you want. So if there's an inaccuracy, let the credit bureau know. If the lender can't resolve it within the given amount of time or provide the proof, they have to take it off, which only benefits you. Another black eye on your credit report would be accounts in collections. These stay on your report for 7 years. This happens when you are over 180 days late on a payment. It means the credit card company, the bank, automatically assumes the worst case scenario and sells your debt to a collection agency for pennies on the dollar. Here's something to think about. If you pay off the debt collector, the information still stays on your credit report for the full 7 years. So technically, it might not be worth paying the debt collector off, as it will have no positive effect on your overall credit score. Let's say you have a debt that went into collections 6.5 years ago. If you go ahead and you pay off that debt, it still stays on your credit report for those 6 additional months. If you don't pay that debt off, it only stays on your report for 6 months. So you have to make that choice. Is it worth paying off the debt? The damage has been done. You've already been paying the consequences. Just something to think about. So what strategies are there for debts and collections? Well, the first thing you always do is look for inaccuracies and errors and dispute them. If you do find something, have the debt collector validate the debt. This is to prove that the debt does exist and it's yours. You use this because debt is sold over and over and over. It's just paper. And every time that paper goes from one place to the next place and then resold to another place, which is then resold to another place, all that time is almost like the telephone game. Information gets changed, lost, things like that. I know of one person that they got a collections removed because when they did that paper shuffling, they lost a document that when they did provide the document, they had forged the person's signature, so automatically it was all thrown out. So these are what we're looking for when you do that. In case everything is picture perfect, remember, debt collectors paid pennies on the dollar for the paper, the debt. So negotiate a payoff with the condition that if the debt is paid, they're going to remove it from your credit report. Get that in writing, because once the debt is paid, that debt collector might not want to even waste any more time with you and your case. So by having the paper, you can then go to the credit report and say, look, I have something against them. It needs to be removed. So when you provide that, they will challenge the person who owns, or the company that owns, the debt. And if they don't answer in 30 days, well, guess what? It's automatically removed anyway. Credit inquiries. These, believe it or not, are bad on your credit, because every time you apply for credit, your credit score does take a hit. Small hit, but it does take a hit. So when you look at credit inquiries, they more or less stay on your credit report for 4 to 6 months. After that, it's safe to apply for a new credit. Every time you request credit or you ask for more credit, an increase, it shows up on your credit report. So what can we do when we have too many credit inquiries? Easy. Stop asking for new credit. No more credit cards, store cards, or gas cards. Do not ask for any credit increases. And if you're going to have to ask for credit, either to buy a house or an apartment or a car loan, wait 8 months before you reapply for new credit. Now, there's sometimes you're going to find on your credit report maxed out credit cards. This shows on your credit report for every time they are maxed out. This is a negative, as it shows you have no more available credit. Again, it's only a negative because you have no more available credit. It doesn't mean anything about how much money you owe. It just means that you are maxed out on credit. So what strategies are there for maxed out credit cards? Well, it's easy. Another one that's very easy. Pay down your credit cards. Preferably pay off your credit cards. Here in the United States, I've always heard try not to use more than 10% of your available credit limit. That means if, let's say, you have $5,000 in available credit, you're only spending 500 of it. That way, you're never over the 10%. But if you have $30,000 worth of available credit, you can spend up to $3,000 a month and it would have no negative impacts on your credit. In the United States, credit available to you makes up 30% of your overall credit score. Another item you might find on a credit report, but you would more or less be aware of it unless your identity has been stolen, is a foreclosures. Foreclosures stay on your report for 7 years. Foreclosures usually happen after 4 months of late payments or really no payment on a mortgage. The bank begins the process to attempt to recover the balance of the loan by forcing the sale of the asset used as the collateral for the loan. In other words, they take away your house and sell it at auction. So, what strategies are there for clearing up the foreclosures on your credit report? Well, we're going to assume you know it's your foreclosure and it is your foreclosure. Because if it's not, you need to contact the credit bureau and dispute that your identity has been stolen. So we know it's our debt. So what can we do? Well, removing it is very difficult, if not impossible. But as always, look for errors and inaccuracies and dispute them. Another thing you can do is verify the age of the foreclosure. If it's older than 7 years, request it to be removed from the report. It shouldn't be there after 7 years. Another thing you might do is research if the lender is still in business. If they are not, dispute it. Again, if there's no one there to tell the credit report when they challenge the blemish on your report, guess what? They have to take it off. But more in general and more often, you're going to have to work around this blemish on your credit report. So all the things we've said before to this point apply. We need to make sure we don't use up all our available credit. We need to make sure we pay off our credit cards at the end of the month. Things like that. We need to avoid not asking for so much credit in a given year. Now let's look at bankruptcies. Bankruptcies stay on your credit report anywhere from 7 to 10 years, depending on a multiple of things, but in general, 7 to 10 years. This happens when you file for it. Foreclosure is when the bank files for it. Bankruptcy is when you file for it. So what strategies are there for bankruptcy? Well, let's start off from the beginning. It's very, very difficult to get it removed. But always verify the age of the bankruptcy. If it's older than that 7 to 10 year window, request it be removed from your credit report. Once again, look for errors and inaccuracies and dispute them, as well as research if the lender's still in business. If they're not, dispute it again. Because if they're not in business, we're hoping that no one responds and after 30 days they take it off our credit report. And ultimately, we always have to work around the blemish on our credit report. If we follow good behavior with our credit and we're very disciplined, we might be able to work around it for a few years. And as time goes by, it gets better and better for us in terms of getting new credit and cheaper credit. I want to recap why I'm insistent that you always research if the lender is still in business. If the lender is no longer in business and you dispute something and no one responds to the credit bureau, they have to take it off your report. Yes, it's a technicality, but it's the law, at least here in the United States. And if we're bound by the law, so is the credit bureau, and so is the banks and the lenders lending money. So if they're not in business, dispute it and keep your fingers crossed that no one responds. I mentioned it on many of the items that we found could have a negative effect on our credit score. Inaccuracies. Always dispute inaccuracy. This strategy works because of the likelihood that since the paper has been bought and sold over and over again, a mistake has been created, no one has caught it, and it's just been passed on to the next purchaser of the debt. We need to make sure that we ask the collector to prove that the debt exists and that it belongs to you. If they can't do that, or if they don't do that in the given amount of time, it has to be removed from the credit report. Fortunately, as I mentioned before, when we look at foreclosures and we look at bankruptcies, as well as some of the other ones, we need to work around the blemish. So what you have to do is really fix as much as possible and continue making all your payments on time and avoid maxing out your credit cards. Remember, the aim is to keep your available credit spending below 10% of your maximum amount of credit available. We want to do this because business requires banks and lenders to take a risk on people. And when the risk isn't so certain, they charge a higher interest rate. So you want to attract those people that say, I kind of want to take a risk at you, but only if I'm getting a little bit more. We always want to get the interest rate as close to prime as possible, but not all loans loan at prime rate. So that's what we need to look at. So we need to work around the blemishes. It doesn't mean we'll never have credit again. No. Luckily in the United States, we have that 7-year window where if we're patient enough and we wait 7 years, everything gets fixed. So just keep these things in mind when you're requesting for the first time your credit report. It's not all doom and gloom. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Today is the day you start that journey, and guess what? Tomorrow it just gets better. A month from now is even more better. A year from now, you're going to look back and go, I'm glad I started fixing my bad credit score a year ago. So now you know the strategies of how to fix your credit scores. So go and tackle the world.
That concludes today's lesson, and if you haven't done so, please go ahead and smash that like button down below. It really does help the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you're notified the next time I release another lesson. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.